Hag Sameach, Purim Tobim. We greet you today for the observance of the reading and the hearing of the sacred script of the book of Hadassah called Esther. O Abba Elohim, may the teaching of this book please your sight for the benefit of your people, Israel. In Yeshua HaMashiach's name, Selah. Amen. Chapter 1. Wayahi b'mei Achawaresh, hu Achawaresh, Hamelik Machado, Wa'ad Kush, Sheba, Wadasarayim, Wume'ar Madina. Bar Yamim Hakim, Kara Shevet, Hamelik Achashwaresh, El Kased Melkuto, Esher Bar Shushan, Habira. Barashanat Shalosh Lar Melako, Asar Mishte, Lako Saral, Warabadal Chayil, Peras, Bu Madai, Hara Peratamim, Warasari, Hara Madinot, Lara Panal, Barherato at Asar Karabot, Melakoto wa at Yakar Tafaaret, Gadulato Yamim Rabim, Sharmonim Wu Ma'at Yom, Wu Balo Maluchat, Haryamim Ha'ele Arsar Hamelek, Lakul Chayim Chanemasayim Bar Shushan, Habira, La Migdol Wa'ad Katan, Mishte Sharaba'at Yamim, Bar Chasar, Ginat Beyatain, Hamelek, Hor Kerapam, Wadataklet Achum, Bar Charabale Buz, Aragaman, El Gelele, Kasef, Waramude, Shesh Meod, Teot, Zahab, Warakaf, Saf, El Raspat, Barchat, Wareshesh, Waradar, Warasoharat, Warharshkot, Barakale, Zahab, Warakalayim, Merakalayim, Shonim. Wayam Melkut Rab Bayet Hamelek, Warhishtaya Kadad Me'ain Anam Ki Kain Yasat Hamelek, El Kol Rab Bayathon, Laresot Karazon, Ish Wad Ish, Gam Wa Vashti, Hamel Ka Arasta, Mishte Nashim Bayet Hamelkut, Esel Amelik Achashwarash. Baryom Harishebe E Baratob Lab Hamelik Bayain, Amela Mahuma, Bizta, Harabona, Bigta, War Abagatha, Zeta, Warakakam, Sharabaat Harserasim, Hamar Sheratim, At Panay Hamelik Achawaresh, Lar Harabi at Vashti, Harmeleka Lara Penecha Melek, Barakater Melekut Lacheraud, Haramim, Warhasarayim at Yefaya, Ki Toba Meriehi, Wadatamain Hamelekat, Vashti Labor, Barabel Hamelek Eshur Bayet, Haserasim Warrior Kasaf Hamelek Meu, Warhamadato, Baerai Bo, Wayoma Hamelek La Hakimim, Yoda Haratim Ki Kain, Dabel Hamelek Larapanekol Yora Dat Waradayim, Warharakarob Alal Karshanar Zeta, Admata, Tarshish, Meras, Merasana, Mamukan, Sharabaat, Sare Peres, Wuramadai, Roase Pane, Hamelik Hariashbim, Roashenara Balamelukut, Badad Ma Laresut, Bar Melkat Warashati, El Eshelo Arasatar at Maramal Hamelik, Ahawarash, Barrier Harserasin, Wariomaromu Mokan, Larapane Hamelik, Warharasarim, Lo El Hamelik Larabado, Avashti, Varashati, Hamelakat, Ki El Kul Harasarim wa El Kul Haramim Eshir Barkul Madino, Hamelik Aharios was, Ki Yarase Laber Hamelekat, El Kul Hanashim Lar Harabazot, Bar Alehim, Bar Anachim, Bar Amaras Hamelik Aharawash, Ama Lar Harabi Ad Iwasti, Hamelika Larapanel Walu Ba'a, Wahayon Haze Toramerana, Selrut Peres Wu Made, Eshir Sharma U Adabir Hamelika, La Kora Sare Haramelak, Warakader Marazuza, Warakasif, Im Al Hamelik, Tob Yarasara Dabarai, Malakut Melapanar Varierakatar, Barada Thai Perash, Wumade Walo Yarabur, Ashilo Tabo, Vashti, Larapane Hamelik, Ahaswarash, Udmelakutar, Yatan Hamelik, Lara Utar, Lara Tubar, Memena, Varinishmara Matara Gam Hamelik, Eshura Sara Barkol Melakuto, Kirabahi Barkol, Hanashim Yitanu, Yeka Laraba Alichan, La Magdol, Wa Al Katan. Wariyatam Kadaber Baranai Hamelik, Warhasdin, Waria Es Hamelik, Karaber Mamukan, Warishlag Safraim, El Kol Madino, Hamelik El Medina, Wur Madina, Kakatabar, War Al Am, Wa Am Karashono, Lachayot Kol Ish Sarer. Babayato wu medaber kalashon emo. And it happened in the days of Ahasuerus. He is Ahasuerus who reigned from India even to Ethiopia, over 120 provinces. In those days when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom in Shushan the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a banquet for all his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media. The nobles and the princes of the provinces were before him. When he made known the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent goodness many days, even 180 days. And when those days were fulfilled, the king made a banquet for all the peoples who were found in Shushan the palace, both to great and to small, for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There was overlaying with white linen and violet, with cords of fine linen, and purple to silver rings, and pillars of white marble. The couches were of gold and silver, on a red and white and pearl black marble pavement. And they gave out drink in vessels of gold, the vessels differing from one another, and royal wine in abundance, according to the hand of the king. And the drinking was according to the Torah, no one compelling, for so the king had ordered every chief of the house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. Also, Vashti, the queen, made a banquet for the women in the royal house which King Ahasuerus owned. On the seventh day, when the heart of the king was feeling good with wine, he said to Mahuman, Bizda, Harbona, Bigda, Abagatha, Zetar, and Korkas, the 7 eunuchs serving before the king, the face of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the royal crown, in order to make known to the people and the princes her beauty, for she was beautiful to look upon. But Vashti the queen refused to come at the king's command by his eunuchs, and the king was very angry, and his fury burned within him. And the king said to the wise men who knew the times, for so was the king's manner toward all who knew law and judgment. And ones next to him were Akarashan, Hena, Shathar, Admathar, Tarshish, Meres, Marsines, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who saw the king's face, who sat first in the kingdom. What shall be done with the queen Vashti according to law? Because she has not done the command of King Ahasuerus by the eunuchs. And Memucan answered before the king and princes, Vashti the queen has not only done wrong to the king, but also to all the princes and to all the people who are in all the provinces of Ahasuerus the king. For the matter of the queen shall go out to all women to make their husbands despised in their eyes. In their reporting that King Ahasuerus said to bring in Vashti the queen before him, but she did not come. And this day the princesses of Persia and Media, who have heard the queen's word, shall say the same to all the king's princes, and there shall be contempt and strife. If it please the king, let there be a royal decree from him, and let it be written among the laws of Persia and Media, so that it shall not pass away, that Vashti come no more before King Ahasuerus. And let the king give her royal estate to a neighbor who is better than she. And when the king's decree which he shall make shall be throughout all his empire, for it is great, all the wives shall give their husbands honor, both the small and the great. And the saying pleased the king and the princes. And the king did according to the word of Memucan. And he sent letters into all the king's provinces, and to every province according to its writing, and to peoples and peoples according to language, so that every man should be ruling in his house, and speaking according to the language of his people. Chapter 2. Acher Kharabarim Kha'ele Karashak Hamad Khamelik Akhar Warish Zakar Ad War Vashti Wa Adasha Asata Wa Adasha Negazar Aleha Mariomehu Na're Khamelik Marashar Tal Yabakashu La Melek Ne'erot Baratulot Tabot Merie Wayafakad Hamelek Bakidin Barakol Medinot Melekutor Vadiyakabasu Alko Naera Baratula Toba Mere Al Shushan Habira Adbair Hanashim Aliyad Hage Sarim Hamelik Shomer Hanasim Wanaton Ti Marakechin Warana Erar Esher Titab Barane Hamelik Taramalak Tachat Vashti Bariatab Haraber Baranai Hamelik Baryares King Ish Yahudi היה בר שושן, הבירה בר שמו מרדכי, בן יאיר, בן שמאי, בן קיש, איש ירמיני, אשר חרגולר מירושלים עם הרגלה, אשר חרגתר עם ירקניה, מלך יהודה, אשר חרגלה נבוכדנצר מלך בבל. ויהי אומן עד חדשה, היא אסתר, בת דודו, כי אין לחר אבי, ואם וחנארה יפת תרמה, ורטובר מריה. ורברמות ערביה ורמה לכך מרדכי לו לבת. ויהי ברחר שמר דבר המלך, ורתו ובחקבץ נערות רבות אל שושן, הדבירה אל יד הגר. ותלקט אסתר אל בית המלך אל יד הגיא שומר חנשים. ותתב הנערה ברנל, ותסר חסד לרפנר ויבחיל את תרמרוחיה, ואת מנותיה, לתלר ואת שבר הנערות, הראיות לתות לה מבית המלך וישנק, ואת נערותיה לתור בית הנשים. לא הרגידר אסתר את אמה, ואת מולדתה, כי מרדכי סיור אלה אשר לא תרגיל. ורבר כל יום ויום מרדכי מתחלק לרפני חסר בית הנשים, לדעת את שלום אסתר ומריה סבא. וברחרגיתר נערה ונערה לבוא אל המלך אחשוורוש, מקץ חיו לה כדת חנשים שניהם, ארסו חדש, כי כן ימלאו ימי מרוקיכם 6 חדשים, בשמן חמר ו6 חדשים בבשמים ובתמרוקי קרגשים. ורברזה הנערה בעל אל המלך אל כל אשר תורמו, ינתן לה לרבור אמה מבית נשים עד בית המלך. בערב היא בעל ורברכה, חייר שבר אל בית הנשים, שני אל יד שעשגז, שרעים המלך, שומר פלגשים, לא תרבור עוד אל המלך, כי אם חפץ בר המלך, ונקראה בר שם. ורברחרגייר תר אסתר, בת ארביחיל, מרדכי דוד, אשר לקחה את הבת לבוא אל המלך לו בקשה, דבר כי אם עד אשר יאמר חנאי, שרים המלך שומר הנשים ותחי אסתר נושה עד כן ברנאי קוראיה. ותלקח אסתר אל המלך אחשוורוש אל בית מלכות בחדש, ו10 הוא חודש טבע בשנת 7 למלכותו. ויאהב המלך את אסתר, מכל האנשים ברתסכם, ורחסת לרפנר מכל חרבתולו, וריה שם כתר מלכות, בחרוע שר וריה מלכיה, תחת ושתי. וריה אס המלך משתה גדול לכל ישראל, ועבדל על משתה אסתר. ורחה גרחה למדינות, ארסר ורייתן המרשעת, בריד המלך. ובהקיבץ ברתולות שני, ומרדכי ישר ברשער המלך. אין אסתר מרגדת מולדתה ואת אמר כאשר סוואר אליה מרדכי ואת מרמור מרדכי אסתר עושה כאשר חרייתה ברמנר אותו. בימים חכים מרדכי ירשר ברשעיר המלך כסף בקטן ותרש שני סרסי המלך משמרי כסף ויבקשו לרשלת יד בר מלך אחורש. ויודר הדבר למרדכי ויגע לאסתר המלכה ותאמר אסתר למלך ברשם מרדכי ויבקש חדבר וימסר ויתעלו שנחם אל עץ ויכתב בספר דברי הימים לרפני המלך. Chapter 2. And the king's servants who served him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, and let the king choose officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, so that they may gather together every beautiful virgin to Shushan the palace, to the house of the women, to the house of Haggai, the king's eunuch keeper of the women, to give their purification. And let the young women who pleases the king rule instead of Vashti. And the thing pleased the king, and he did so. In Shushan the palace there was a certain Jew, and his name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamin, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity which had been led away with Jeconiah, king of Yehuda, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had exiled. And he was rearing Hadassah, she is Esther, her uncle's daughter, for she had no father nor mother. And the young woman was fair of appearance and beautiful of form. And at the death of her father and mother, Mordecai took her for his daughter. And it happened when the king's command and his order was heard, and when many young women had been gathered to Shushan the palace into the hand of Haggai, Esther was taken into the king's house, into the hand of Haggai, keeper of the women. And the young woman was good in his eyes, and she arose in favor before him, and he hastened her purifiers and her portions to give them to her. And 7 young women were seen to be given to her out of the king's house. And he moved her and her maids to the best place in the house of the women. Esther had not revealed her people or her kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her that she should not reveal it. And Mordecai walked to and fro every day in front of the court of the women's house, in order to know Esther's welfare and what would be done with her. And when the turn of each young woman had come to go into King Ahasuerus, at the end of her being purified 12 months, according to the law of the women, for so were fulfilled the days of their cleansings, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with fragrances and with perfumes of the women. In this way, the young woman goes into the king. All she says is given to her to go with her out of the house of the women to the king's house. She goes in the evening, and on the morning she returns to the second house of the women into the hand of Esharagachsaz, the king's eunuch who kept the concubines. She does not come into the king anymore unless the king delights in her, and she is called by name. And when the turn of Esther had come, she being the daughter of Abigail, Mordecai's uncle, whom he had taken to himself for his daughter, to go in to the king, she did not seek a thing except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, the keeper of the women, said, and Esther had favor in the sight of all who looked on her. And Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal house in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she rose in grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. And he set a royal crown on her head and made her to rule instead of Vashti. And the king made a great banquet for all his princes and his servants, Esther's banquet. And he ordered a rest for the provinces and gave gifts according to the state of the king. And when the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai sat in the king's gate. Esther had not revealed her kindred or her people, as Mordecai had commanded her. For Esther obeyed Mordecai's command, as she did when she was reared by him. In those days, where Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, of those who guarded the threshold, were angry and sought to stretch out a hand against King Ahasuerus. And the thing was made known to Mordecai, who told it to Esther the queen. And Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. And when the matter was searched into, it was found out, and the two of them were hanged on a tree. And it was written in the book of the matters of the days before the king. Chapter 3 in Hebrew. אחר חרברים אלה גדל המלך ואחרורש עד חיימן בין חרמרתה חראגגי ונרסהו וריסם ארקסהו מעל כל חסראים על שירותו וקר ערבדך המלך אשר ברשייר המלך הוראים ורמשתחווים לחיימן כי כן סיוע לו המלך ומרדכי לא יקרא ולא ישתחווה. ויאמר עבד המלך אל אשר ברשאל המלך למרדכי מדוע אתה עובר את מרסווי המלך ויחי ברם הרם על היום ויום ולא שמח אליכם ויגדו לחיימן לראות ירמדו דברי מרדכי כי הגיד לכם אשר הוא יהודי. וירא חיימן כי אין מרדכי קרא ורמשתחווה לו וימלא חמן חמה ויבש ברנל לרשלח יד במרדכי לבדו כי הרגדו לא את עם מרדכי ויבקש חיימן לחשמי את כל היהודים אשר בכל מלכות אחשוורוש עם מרדכי. בחדש הראשון הוא חדש ניסן בשנת 12 למלך ואחשוורוש חרפיר פור, חוך הגורל, לרפני חמן, מהיום ליום הוא מחדש, לחדש שנה 10 חודש אדר. ויאמר חמן למלך אחשוורוש, ירסנו אם אחד מפרזר, ופורת בין חרמים בכל מדינות מלכותך, ודעתכם שנות מכל עם את דעתי המלך אינם עושים. ולמלך אין סיבה להרחניכם. אם אל המלך טוב ירקתיו לעבדם ול10,000 ככר כסף אשכול אל ידי עשי המלכה, לרחרבי אל גנזי המלך. ויסר המלך טבייתו מאל יתו, ויתנה לחמן בן חתרתה ארגגי, שרר היהודים. ויאמר המלך לחמן, הכסף נתון לך וחיים לעשות בו כתוב בעיניך. ויקראו ספרי המלך בחודש הראשון, ב13 יום בו, ויכתב בכל אשר ציווה המן אל אחרת פני. חר המלך ואל חרפחות אל מדינה ומדינה, ואל שרי אם ועם מדינה ומדינה, ככתבה ועם ועם, כלשונו ברשם המלך אחשוורוש, נכתב ונחתם בתרבעת המלך, ונסלות ספריים בעיר חרייסים, אל כל מדינות המלך להרשמית לחרוב ולרבת את כל היהודים, מן העיר ועד זקן, טף ונשים, ביום אחד ב13 לחודש, שנה 10 חדש אדר, ושללם לרבוש. ותשכן חרקתיו להחגתן דת בכל מדינה ומדינה, נגלוי לכל חרמים לחיות עתידים ליום הזה. הרסים ירסעו דחופים, בדבר המלך ורחדת נתנה ברשושן, הבירה והמלך וחמן ישבו לשתות, ורחייר שושן נבקה. Chapter 3 in English. After these things, King Ahasuerus enlarged Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and raised him, and set his seat above all the princes with him. And all the king's servants who were in the king's gate were bowing and worshiping Haman, for the king had so commanded for him. But Mordecai did not bow nor worship. And the king's servants who were at the gate of the king said to Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's command?" And it happened when they spoke daily to him, and he did not listen to them, they told Haman to see if Mordecai's matters would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai did not know to bow nor worship him, then Haman was filled with fury, and it was light in his eyes to reach forth a hand against Mordecai alone, for they had revealed to him Mordecai's people. And Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who are in all the promise of Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai. In the first month, It is the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus. They might fall poor, that is the lot, before Haman day by day, and from month to month, to the 12th month, that is the month Adar. And Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. And the laws are different from every people, and they are not doing the king's laws. And it is not for the king's gain to let them alone. If it pleases the king, let it be written to destroy them. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those who do the work, to bring it into the king's treasuries. And the king took his ring from his hand and gave it to Haman the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the Jews' vexer. And the king said to Haman, the silver is given to you, also the people, to do with them as seems good to you. Then the king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the first month, and it was written according to all that Haman had commanded to the king's satraps, and to the governors who were over every province, and to the rulers of every people of every province, according to its writing, and to every people according to their language. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus, and sealed with the king's ring. And the documents were sent by the runners into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day on the 13th of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take what they owned for a prize. A copy of the writing to be given as law in every province was published to all people to be ready for that day. The runners went out, being hurried by the king's word, and the decree was given in Shushan the palace. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city Shushan was perplexed. Chapter 4 in Hebrew. Mordecai yadar at kul ashira narasa, yikrar Mordecai at Bagadal wa Yabash, Sak warafar varyasa, Baratok Ha'ir Yisak, Sarakar Gadola Wu Mora, Waryabo at Larapane Sayer Chamelik, Ki ein labo el Sayer Chamelik Belabosh Sak, Wurbarkol Madedina Wu Madedina Makum Ishada Ber Chamelik, Warato Maragiar Abel, Gadol Yahudim Warasum, Wurbarki Wumasapara Sak, Warapara Yarasa Lach Rabim, Warata Boh Eina, Naerot Esther, War Sarase, Waryara Gedu Lar Varatir Khalal, Hamelaka, Me'ur Varatishlak, Baragadim Lar Khalabish at Mordecai, Walachasir Shaku, Ma'aler, Walor Kabal. Waratik Rar Esther, Lachatekar, Marasarase, Hamelik Eshir, Harumai, Larapanea, Warataswehu, El Mordecai, Lada at Maraze, wa El Maraze, Wariasar Hatak, El Mordecai, El Rohab Ha'ir, Esher Larapanai Shair Hamelik. Wariagat Lo Mordecai at Kul Esher Kratru Warat. Parashat Harakasef, Esher Amar Heman, Laresher Kol, El Negazi Hamelik, Bariyahudim, Larabadam. Wa Arapatashkan, Katab Hadat, Asher, Natan bar Shushan, Larchishmatam, Natan lo Ra'ot at Esther, Wula Chagit, La Wula Sawot, Elecha Labo El Hamelik, La Hitar Hanan lo, Wula Bakesh Melapanal El Amar. Wariabo Chatak, Wariagat Lar Esther at Chadabari Mordecai. Waratorama Esther Lar Chatak, Waratiswahu El Mordecai. Kol Arabade Chadamelik Waram Madino Wachamelik. Yoraim Aresher Kol Ish Warasha Warasher Bo El Hamelik El Chachaser Harapanimi Aresher Lor Kre Echat Dato Larcharamid Labat Maresher Yashit Lo Hamelik Ar Serabit Charzachab Warchaye Warani Lo Nikrati Labo El Hamelik Ze Shaloshim Yom. Warigadu La Mordecai at Debrai Esther Variomer Mordecai Lar Kharshib Al Esther El Titmi Bana Pashek Lar Kimalat Bayir Hamelik Mekol Hayu Hadim Ki Im Chachad Resh Techarasi Ba'er Kharzoa Khru War Kharsalar Yaramaut Lar Yahudim Memakum Echer Wa'et Wurbayet Arabit Tarabado Wumi Yodar Im La'et Karzo at Kharagaat Lar Melakut Waratoma Esther Lar Kharshib Al Mordecai Lek Kano at Sam Kol Kharyu Hadim Hanema Sa'im Bar Shushan Warasumu Alal Wa'ad Kalu Wa'ad Tishto Shalashet Yamim Laila Waryom Gam Ani Wana Arati Asum Ken Wurba Kol Arabo Al Hamelik Eshelo Kadat Warakarisher Arabadati Wayarabor Mordecai Waryas Kakul Esher Siwata Alal Esther. And Mordecai understood all that was done. And Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes and went out into the middle of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry. And he came before the king's gate, for there was no entering into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And in every province, wherever the king's word and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting and weeping and wailing. Sackcloth and ash was spread on many. And Esther's maids and her eunuchs came and told her, and the queen was exceedingly wreathed in pain. And she sent clothing to clothe Mordecai, and to take away his sackcloth from him. But he did not accept. And Esther called for Hatak of the king's eunuchs, who were made to stand before her. And she charged him as to Mordecai to know what this was and why this was. And Hatak went out to Mordecai to the city street in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him of all that had happened to him, and of the sum of the silver which Haman had said to weigh unto the king's treasuries for the Jews in order to destroy them. Also he gave him a copy of the writing of the law which was given at Shushan in order to destroy them, to show it to Esther, and to reveal to her, and to command to her that she should go in to the king and make supplication to him, and to seek from him help for the people. And Hatak came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Again Esther spoke to Hatak and ordered him to go to Mordecai. for all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces. Know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come to the king into the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his, execution, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, so that he may live. But I have not been called to come in to the king these 30 days. And they told Mordecai Esther's words. And Mordecai said to take back to Esther, do not imagine within yourself to deliver yourself in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if you are completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance shall rise up to the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house shall perish. And who knows if you have attained to the kingdom for such a time as this? And Esther said to take back to Mordecai, go gather together all the Jews being found in Shushan and fast for me, and do not eat or drink 3 days, night or day. My maidens and I will also fast in the same way. And so I will go in to the king, which is not according to the law. And if I have perished, I have perished. And Mordecai passed over and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. Chapter 5 in Hebrew. وَيَهِي بَيَوْمْ خَرَشَلَشِي وَلَتَلَبَشْ أَرْسْتَرَ مَلِكُوت وَرْخَرْتَمُوت بَرْخَسَرَ بَيَت خَمَلِك خَرَپَنِمِت نَخَارَ بَيَت خَمَلِك بَرْخَمَلِك يَرْشَب الْكَسَي مَلِكُتو بَبَيَت خَرَمَكُوت نِوْكَا پِتَا خَرْبَيَت وَيَهِي كَرَاوت خَمَلِك أَسْتَار خَمَلِكَا ومدات برخسر نساء خين برانان بريشات خملك لار استا ات سرابيم خرزخاب اشر بريادور ورتكراب استا ورتنار بروش خا الشرابيت بريوم اللار خملك ما لك Esther Hamelka, Urma Barakarstek, Erhasi, Hamelkut, Barianatan Lek. Waratoma Esther Im El Hamelik to, Yarbor Hamelik Warheman, Hayom El Hamashte, Erisher Arasati Lo. Wariom Hamelik, Marheru Arheman Larasot, Araba, Erster Variabo Hamelik, ورخيمان الخرمشتي الشر أرستي أرستا بار يوم خملك لار أستا برامستي خياين مر لاتك وريناتان لك ومار بركاستك خاسي خملكوت ورتارسي ورتاين أستر ورتارا مور شاوتي وبركاشتي إمر سرتي خين براناي خملك وإم الخملك تو لا تر أد سألتي ولا رصوت أد بركارستي يربول خملك ورخيمان الخمستي أشر أسي لخيم ومخار أسي كدابر خملك ورياسي خيمان بيوم خلقو سماع ورطوب لاب وركاريوت خيمان at Mordecai باشا الملك ولو قام ولو زا ممنو وريمالا خمان المردكاي خمان ويترفاك خمان وريبو البايتو وريسلاق وريبو at Ochabal war at Zerash Ishto, ויספר לכם חמן ארכה בור עשרה ואחרו ברנל ועד כל אשר נדלת המלך ועד אשר נשאו אל חסריים ועד בעדי המלך ביום החימן אף לא חרביער אסתר חרמלכר עם המלך אלא משתה אשר עשתה כי אם אותי וגם לרמחר אני קראו לר עם המלך וכל זה איננו שווה לא בכל עד אשר אני רועש עד מרדכי היוחדי ישב בישעייר המלך ותורם לו זרש אשתו וכל אוהביו ירשו את גבר חרמשים אמר בבוקר אמר למלך ויתעלו עד מרדכי עליו ובר עם המלך אל משתה שמחה ויתב חרבר לרבני חמן ויעש העץ. And it happened on the third day that Esther put on her royal clothing and stood in the inner court of the king's house, before the king's inner house. And the king was sitting on his royal throne in the royal house, in front of the gate at the house. And it happened when the king saw Esther, the queen, standing in the court, she rose in favor in his eyes. And the king held out his golden scepter that it was in his hand to Esther. And Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. And the king said to her, What shall be done to you, O Queen Esther? And what is your wish? It shall be given to you also even to the half of the kingdom. And Esther answered, If it seems good to the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet which I have prepared for him. And the king said, Cause Haman to hurry to do the word of Esther. And the king and Haman came to the banquet which Esther had prepared. And the king said to Esther at the banquet of wine, What is your petition? And it shall be granted to you. And what is your wish? And it shall be done to half of the kingdom. And Esther replied and said, As to my petition and my request, if I have found favor in the eyes of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow according to the word of the king. And Haman went out that day joyful and with a good feeling. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he did not stand up to move for him, he was full of fury against Mordecai. But Haman held himself in and came to his house and sent for and brought in his friends and his wife Zeresh. And Haman told them of the glory of the riches and his many sons, and all to which the king had promoted him, and how he lifted him up above the princes and the servants of the king. And Haman said, Also Esther the queen did not let anyone come in with the king to the banquet that she had prepared except me. And also tomorrow I am called to it with the king. Yet all this is no gain to me as long as I am seeing Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. And his wife Zeresh said to him and all his friends, Make a wooden gallows 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak to the king, and let them hang Mordecai on it, and go in with the king to the banquet rejoicing. And the thing was good in Haman's eyes, and he caused the wooden gallows to be made. Chapter 6 in Hebrew. Balalahu nada shenat hamelech ביום הלכבי את ספר הזכרנות, דברי הימים, ויקהיו נקראים לרבני המלך. וימסר כתוב אשר חרגיד, מרדכי אל בגתנה, ותרש שני סרסי המלך, משמרי הצף, אשר ברכשו, ורשלח ידו במלך אחשורוש. ויאמר המלך, מה נעשה יקר וגדולה למרדכי על זה? ויאמרו נערי המלך משושרתו, לא נעשה עתו דבר. ויאמר המלך, מי בחסר וחמן בא לחסר בית המלך החסונה, לרמור המלך לתלות את מרדכי אל העץ, אשר חבין לו. ויאמרו נערי המלך אליו, הנה חמן עומד בחסר. ויאמר המלך, יבוא. ויבוא חמן ויאמר לו המלך, מה לעשות באיש אשר המלך חפץ בקרו? וירמור חמן בלבו, למי יחפץ המלך לעשות יקר ממני? ויאמר חמן אל המלך, איש אשר המלך חפץ בקרו, וביאהו לרבוש מלכות אשר לבש בו המלך, ורסוס אשר רכב אל המלך, ואשר נתן כתר מלכות בראשו, ונתן הלבוש והסוס את יד איש משרי המלך, ופרטמים וחלבשו את האיש אשר המלך חפץ ויקראו וחרבבהו אל הסוס ברוחב העיר, וקראו לרבני כיכר ירסי לאיש אשר המלך חפץ בקרו. ויאמר המלך לחמן, מרחר כי ארך הלבוש וארך הסוס כאשר דברת, ולעשה כן למרדכי היהודי, ישב ברשער המלך אל טפל דבר מכל אשר דברת. ויקח המן את הלבוש ואת הסוס, וילבוש את מרדכי, וירבהו ברוחב העיר, ויקרא לרבני וכיכר ירסי לאיש אשר המלך חפץ בקרו. וישב מרדכי אל שער המלך, וחמן נטף אל בית אבי, וכפו רועש. ויספר חמן לזרש אשתו ולכל אוכביל את כל אשר קראו, ויאמר לו הרקמל. וזרש אשתו עם מזרח היהודי מרדכי אשר החלות לנפל לרפנל לו, תוקל לו כי נפול תפול לרפנל עודם מרבריים עמו. ורסרסי המלך הרגעו ויבחלו לרבי עד המן אל המשתה אשר הרסתר אסתר. On that night, the king's sleep fled, and he said to bring in the book of the records of the Chronicles. And they were being read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, the guards of the threshold, who sought to stretch forth a hand against King Ahasuerus. And the king said, "What honor and dignity has been done to Mordecai for this?" And the young servants of the king, of his ministers, said, Nothing has been done for him. And the king said, Who is in the court? And Haman had come into the outer court of the king's house to speak to the king to hang Mordecai on the wooden gallows which he had built for him. And the king's servant said to him, Behold, Haman stands in the court. And the king said, Let him come in. And Haman came in. And the king said to him, What shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor? And Haman thought in his heart, To whom would the king delight to do honor more than to myself? And Haman answered the king, For the man whom the king delights to honor, let the royal clothing be brought which the king puts on himself, and the horse that the king rides on, and the royal crown which is set on his head, and let this clothing and horse be given into the hand of one of most noble men, of the king's most noble princes. And let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and cause him to ride on the horse through the street of the city, and call out before him. In this way shall be done to the man whom the king delights in honoring him. And the king said to Haman, Hurry, take the clothing and the horse, as you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not fail to do any of all the things you have spoken. And Haman took the clothing and the horse and dressed Mordecai, and caused him to ride through the street of the city, and called out before him, In this way shall be done to the man whom the king delights in honoring him. And Mordecai came again to the king's gate. But Haman hurried to his house mourning, and his head covered. And Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him. Then his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, If Mordecai is of the seed of the Jews, before whom you have begun to fall, you shall not prevail against him, but shall surely fall before him. And while they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived, and they hurried to bring Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. The end of chapter 6 in English. Chapter 7 in Hebrew. Wariyabul Hamelech Warhaman Larashatot im Esther Halmeleka. Wariyom Hamelech Lar Esther Gambaryom Haresheni Baramiste Hayaimin Hasha Alteka. Esther Haramelekar Waratenatan Lek Udmi Barakarstek Hasi Harameleku Waratarase. Warate an Esther Halameleka Waratora Marim Marasarati Khain Baranecha Hamelik Wa im Hamelik Tob Hanatan Li Napeshi Warashalati Warami Babakashati Ki Namakeranu Ani Warami Larashami Larhadok Ularabat Walalu Larabadim Ular Sharafahut Gam Karamnu Harashati Kain Ain Harasara Shavara Banasak Hamelik Baryoma Hamelik Ahoswaras Baryoma La Esther Harameleka Mi Hu Ze Why is Ze Hu Esher Melau Larabo Larasot Kain Baritoma Esther Ish Sar War Oriab Haman Harar Harsei War Haman Neba Ad Melapane Hamelik War Harameleka War Hamelekam Bar Haramato Mimerste Hayim Ella Ganat Harabitan Warheman Omat, Laraba Keshal Nepasho, Marasata, Haramelek, Ha, Ki Ra'a, Ki Kelata, Alal Harar Ma'ad Amelik, Marhamelik Shab, Maragana, Harabayator Elabayat, Mishte, Hayam Barhaman Afel El Haramatar, Ishir Esther, Haleha, Barioma Hamelik, Hagam, La Kabush, Ad Hamelaka, Emi, Babayat Haraber, Yisara Mirapane Hamelik, Upechaman Epo, Barioma Harabona, Echadmin Harasarasin, Larapane Hamelik Gam, Hine, Ha'etz Esher Asa Haman, La Mordecai Esher da Beratob, El Hamelek Umat Bayit Haman Nabua, Haramashim Hama Bariyome Hamelik Telahu Alav, Wariyatalu at Haman El Ha'etz Esher Hakim La Merodakai, Warhamat Hamelik Sherakaka. Chapter 7 in English. And the king and Haman came to the banquet of Queen Esther. And the king said again to Esther on the second day of the banquet of wine, What is your request, O Queen Esther? And it shall be given to you. And what is your request? It shall be done to the half of the kingdom. And Esther the queen answered and said, If I have found favor in your eyes, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, my people and I, for destruction, for murder, and for perishing. But if we had been sold for male slaves and slave girls, I would have kept silence, though the adversary could not make up for the king's loss. And King Ahasuerus answered and said to Esther the queen, Who is he, this one? And where is this one? He who is filled with pride in his heart to do so. And Esther said, A man, an enemy, and one hating Haman, this evil one. And Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. And the king, rising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden. And Haman remained to beg for his life from Esther the queen, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. And the king returned out of the garden to the place of the banquet of wine. And Haman had fallen on the couch on which Esther lay. And the king said, Will he also violate the queen with me in the house? The word went from the king's mouth, and they covered Haman's face. And Harbanan, one of the eunuchs, said before the king, Also, look, wooden gallows which Haman made for Mordecai, the one who had spoken good toward the king, is standing at Haman's house. And the king said, Hang him on it. And they hanged Haman on the wooden gallows which he had prepared for Mordecai. And the king's wrath lay down. Chapter 8 in Hebrew. Bariyom hachu natan hamelik Ahasuerus lar Esther halmelaka Arbayir Haman Sara Haryuhadim Mordecai Balara Panechamelek Ki Haragedar Esther Mar Hula Varyasar Hamelekar Tarabato Esher Harabir Me Haman Varyata Na Lara Mordecai Varyata Sham Esther at Mordecai Elbayir Haman Varatosef Esther Varatarabar Lara Panechamelek Vatapol Lara Paneo Ragalar وتربى كفرتا خنا لور خرابي أد رأت هيمان خرقاكي وأد مر خرشباتي أرشر خرشاب ال هيو هديم وريشار خملك لرستا الشرابيد خرزخر ورتا كام استر ورتا رمود لربنا خملك ورتورما إيم الخملك توبا إيم وسارتي خين لربنا وركر شراب لربنا خملك ورتوبا راني برانار يركتاب لرخشيبر خاص إفرايم مرخر شابر خمان برخر فداتا خرقاقي أرشر كتاب لربات أرخيو حديم الشر بركول مدينو خملك كي أركاكا أوكا وخرياتي برا أرشر يمسار أرأمي ور أركاكا أوكال وهرارتي بار أربادان ملوداتي وريومر خملك أرخص ورش لا رخرستا خملكا ورمردكاي خيو هدي هنا باير خمان ناتاتي لار أستر وروتو تلو الخا الشر سلاك يدور بر يهودين ورتام كتبوا الهيو هدين كارتور برا نخم برشام خملك بر خرطامو بر ترى برا أد حملك كي كتاب الشر نكتاب برشام ملك ونختوم بر ترى بأد حملك إن لرخشي وريك راور سوفري خملك برات هاي بر خودش خرشلشي خو خدش شوبان بر شلشار از سرايين بور يكتر بر كل شر سبار ماردكاي كريو حدين آخر شرور فانان ورخرب خود ورسري خرمدينود الشر مرخدل بأركش الشيبار ورسرين و ميار مدينة ور مدينة كي كتاب ورأد وأم كلا شانو وال هيو حديم ككتابام وركلا شونام وري كتار برشم خملك أخر وارش وري ختام بر تربا أدخملك وري شلاك سفرايم بيار خرزايم برسوسين رارك بي خركش هار أخرستر نيم بناي خرمكيم إشنة هملك ليهودا إشارة بركور إير وإلى خكاهير ولا رموت إل نبشام ورخر شامي لا خروق ولا رباد الكل خيائم و مدينة خرسرايم تام تاف ونشر ورشلال لام لربوج ويوم خاد كقول مدينو خملك خسورش برشلشر اسال خدش شني اسال قول خدش ايدار براتو شاغان خركتاب لرخناتان دا ادبر كل مدينة ور مدينة قالوي لكل خراميم ولا خيور خريو خديم أتودين لا يوم خرزي لارخناكم وأرير بكم خرزيم الركبي ركوش أخرشترانيم يرسا أور مربخليم وردر خوفيم برابر خا ملك ورخدات نتنالا برشوشان أبيرا ومردكار يسار ملاباني الملك بلابوش ملكوت تكلوت ورخور ورترات زخر بكدور وترب رايك بوتس وأرقمان وخير شوشان سخلار ورسمخا ولا يهوديم هيتار أورا ورسمخا ورشاشان Wariyakar, Wurbarkol, Madino, Wura Madina, Wurbakal Ir, Wa'alamakome Shada Bel Hamalik, Warator, Magyar Samacha, Warashashun, Lar Yahudim, Mishte, Wayom, Tob, Rabim, Marami Chayeret, Mataria Chadim Ki Nafel, Pachar Chayu Hadim Alekom. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, the vexer of the Jews, to Esther the queen, and Mordecai came before the king. For Esther had told what he was to her, and the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther sat Mordecai over the house of Haman. And Esther spoke yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and she begged him with tears to put away the evil of Haman the Agagite, and his plot which he had plotted against the Yahudim. Then the king held out the golden scepter to Esther, and Esther rose up and stood before the king and said, "If it pleases the king, and if I have found favor before him, and the thing is right before the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to bring back the documents, a sly plan by Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews which are in all the king's provinces. For how shall I be able to look on the evil that shall find my people? Or how shall I be able to look on the slaughter of my kindred?" And King Ahasuerus said to Esther the queen and to Mordecai the Jew, "Behold, I have given Haman's house to Esther, and they have hanged him on the wooden gallows, because he put forth his hand against the Jews. And you write to the Jews according to the good in your eyes, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring, there is no turning back." And the king's scribes were called at that time in the 3rd month, that is the month Sivan, on the 23rd of it. And it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded to the Jews, and to the satraps, and to the governors, and to the princes of the provinces which were from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces. To every province according to its writing, and to every man in their language, and to the Jews according to their writing and according to their language. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, and sealed with the king's ring. And he sent letters by riders on horseback, riders on royal steeds, stallions, even sons of mares. And them the king gave to the Jews in every single city the right to gather together, and to stand for their life, to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and province, the ones compassing them, both little ones and women, and take what they owned for a prize. On one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, the copy of the writing to be made law in every province was revealed unto all people, even to the Jews, being ready for this day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The runners, riders on stallions, royal steeds, went out being hurried and pressed on by the king's command. And the order was given at Shushan, the palace. And Mordecai went out from before the king in apparel of the kingdom of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, and with a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. For the Jews it was light and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province, in every single city, the place wherever the word of the king and his law touched, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell on them. Chapter 9 of the book of Esther in Hebrew. وربرشانیم ارسر خدش خو خدش ایدر برشلشار اثر یوم بور ارشر خرگیا دبر خالملك وراتو لار خراج صوت بيوم اشر سيبا روح يابي خيو عدين لا شلوت باخيم ونخبوك خو اشر يسلافو خريو خديم خما برسناخين نخهلو هيو هدين با إرخ بركورا مدينو هملك خاسوراش لرشلور يدار بر مبكاشي ورادتام بر إيشلور أمات بر پانخم تينابل بر خدام الكل هرامين وركورا سري خرامدينو ورخاسورا رفينين ورخرابا خوت وراسير خرملكا أرسل أربع كلاك وركرسايم وأرخريو خدين كي نفل بقات مردكاي ألخم كي قدول موركاي بباير هملك ورشماهو خلق بركول خرمدينو كل خيش مردكاي خلق ور قدولا وريكور خريا خديم بركول وريارا باخم مكات خراب وخروق وأربادان ورياسو برسراخيم كرزونام و برشوشان خرباريا خرقو خريو خديم ورمر خماس مئود إيش وآت برش ناداثا وآت دلفان وآت أرسباثا وآت بيرثا وآت أداليا وآت إريداثا وآت برامستام وآت إريساي وآت إريدي ورسرار ورخنتاش بناي خمون بين خرمتا سرر خريو خديم هراغور هور برخر زوال لو شلاخو اد يدام بريوم هاخو بار مسافر خرونيم بار شوشان هركيران ربنا خملك بريوم خملك لا استر خلملك رب شوشان هربيرار هرن جو خريو خديم ورغبات خرمش مئود إيش وأر أسره سين خمان برشائر بدينة خملك مار أسو وما شألتك وريناتان لك وما بركرشتك اور ورتا اس ورتومر استا إن الخملك توب يناتان المخلق خديم الشير بار شوشان لرسول كدار خيوم بار أسرات بنا خمان يتالو اللي خايهت بار يوم خملك لار خارج صوت كين ورتاناتان دا بار شوشان وارا سري بنا خمان تالو وريرك خالو خيو هديم الشير بار شوشان قام بيوم أربع أسر لخدش خدار ويخراجي بار شوشان 300 إيش وبركات زو لورس لاخو اد يدام ورشائر خريو هديم الشر بار مدينة خملك نخالو برا موت ألنا بشام ونوخا מאויה בכם וחרוק ורסנחכם חרמישה ורש40,000 ברזו לא רשלחו על ידם ביום 13 לחודש אדר ונוחה בערב 14 בו 14 יום משתה ורשמחה ורחיו הדים אשר ברשושן נחלו חרשולשר 10 בו ובערב 14 בו ונוחה ברחרמשה 10 בו ורסר אותו יור משתה ורשמחה אל כן חיו חדים חרפרוסים חריושבים ברדי חרפרזות עושה עד יום 14 לחודש אדר שמחת ורמשתה וריום טוב ומשלח מנות איש לחרייהו ויכתב מרדכי עד הדברים כאלה וישלח סופריים אל כל חיו חדים אשר ברקור מדינו המלך הרוסורס חרקרבים ורחרוקים לרקיים הלכם לחיור עושים עד יום 14 לחודש אדר ועד יום חרמשה 10 בור ברקור השנר ורשנר כמים אשר נחו בהם חיו חדים מויה בכם ורחה חדש אשר נחפק לכם מיגון לרשמה ומרבל ליום טוב לרשות אותם ימי משתה ורשמר ורמשלח מנות איש לרייהו מתנות לרבכם ורקבל חיו חדים עד אשר חכלו לרשות ועד אשר כתב מרדכי אליכם כי חמן בן חרמדתה חר אגגי שרר כל היהודים חרשב אל היהודים לרבדם ורחרפל פור חור חרגורל לרחרמום ולרבדן ורברבה לרפנך המלך אמה אם חרספר ישב מרשרבתו הרער אשר חרשב אל היהודים אחרו אשר ורתלו אותו ורבנל אל חית אלר כן קראו לימים כאלה פורים אל שם הרפורים אל כן אל כל דברי הרגרת חרזועת ורמה ראו אל קקה ומר חרגייה אליכם קומו ורקבל היהודים אליכם ורזרעם ואלכו חרגלויים אליכם ולא ירב בו לרחיור ארסים עד שני חיימים האלרקה כתבם ורקר זרמנם ברכל שנה ורשנה ורחר ימים האלה נזכריים ונרסים ברכל דור ודור משפחה ומשפחה מדינה ומדינה ועיר ירמה פורים האללו ירברו מתוק היהודים וזכרם עד יוסף מזרעם ולתרקתיו אסתר המלכת בר ארביחל ומרדכי היהודים עד כל תרכף לקיים עד אגרת הפורים עד זוהר הרשנית וישלח ספריים אל כל היהודים אל שבע חרסריים ורמער מדינה מלכות אחשורש דברי שלום ורמת לרקיים עד ימי פורים האלה ברזרמת נחם Karesher Kayim Elekim Mordecai Hayuhadim Wal Esther Haramelaka Wal Karesher Ke Mu Elenabasham Wa Elizeraim Dabere Warazomot Warakatam War Maramar Esther Kayim Dabere Haraperuim Ha'ele Nikata Barasefa. And in the 12th month, that is the month Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's command and his order came to be done, in the day that the enemies of the Jews hoped to take power over them, though it was turned around so that the Jews ruled, they over the ones hating them. The Jews gathered together in their cities and all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to stretch out a hand against those seeking their evil, and no man stood in their presence. For their fear fell on all the peoples, and all the rulers of the provinces, and the satraps, and the governors, and those doing the business which was to the king, were lifting up the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell on them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out into all the provinces. For this man Mordecai was going on and growing greater. And the Jews struck against all their haters with a stroke of the sword, and slaughter and destruction, and did what they desired on those who hated them. And in Shushan the palace, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men, and Parashanda, and Dalphon, and Asphata, and Porata, and Adalia, and Aridata, and Parmashat, and Arisa, and Aridai, and Vajazada. The sons of Haman, the sons of Hamadatha, the vexer of the Jews, they killed, but they did not lay their hands on the spoil. On that day, the number of those who were killed in Shushan, the palace, was brought before the king. And the king said to Esther, the queen, "The Jews have killed and destroyed the 100 men in Shushan, the palace, and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the provinces of the king? And what is your petition, and it is given to you? And what further request, and it will be done?" And Esther said, "If it pleases the king, let it be given to the Jews in Shushan to do tomorrow, also according to the day's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the wooden gallows." And the king commanded it to be so. And the order was given to Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. And the Jews in Shushan also assembled on the 14th day of the month Adar, and killed 300 men at Shushan, but they did not lay their hands on the spoil. But the rest of the Jews in the king's provinces gathered and stood for their lives, and a rest from their enemies, and to kill 75,000 of their foes. But they did not lay their hands on the spoil. On the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day of the same, they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. And the Jews of Shushan assembled on the 13th day of it, and on the 14th day of it, and to rest on the 15th day of the same, and to make it a day of feasting and gladness. On account of this, the Jews of the villages who lived in the unwalled towns made the 14th day of this month Adar a day of gladness and feasting, and a good day, and a day of sending portions one to another. And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, near and far, to cause to rise among them to act on the 14th day of the month Adar, and the 15th day of the same yearly, as the days in which the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month which was turned to them for sorrow to joy, and from mourning unto a good day, and to make them days of feasting, joy, and sending portions to one another, and gifts to the poor. And the Jews understood to do as they had begun, and as Mordecai had written in them, because Haman the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast Pur, that is, the lot, to torment them and to destroy them. But when Esther came to the king, he commanded by the letter, let his wicked plot, which he plotted against the Jews, return on his own head. And they hanged him and his sons on the wooden gallows. On account of this, they called these days Purim, after the name of Pur. But on account of this, all the words of this letter, and what they saw concerning this matter, and what had touched them, the Jews rose up and took on themselves and on their seed, and all joining themselves to them, even not to pass, to be keeping those 2 days according to their writing and according to their time every year, and that these days should be remembered and acted upon in every generation, every family, every province, in every city, and that those days of Purim should not pass from among the Jews, and their memory not perish from their seed. But Esther, the queen, the daughter of Abigail, and Mordecai the Jew, wrote with all authority to be caused to be lifted the second letter of Purim. And he sent the letters to all the Jews, to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, words of peace and truth. This was in order to confirm those days of Purim in their set times, according to Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen had ordered them, and as they had decreed for themselves and for their seed the matters of the fastings and of their cry. And the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it is written in the book. Chapter 10 of Esther in Hebrew. Vayasham Hamelech Ahasuerus Mem al Ha'eretz Vachaye Chayim Varakol Harmarase Tukafur Varagaborato Valparashat Gadolot Mordecai Asher Gedalo Melech Chalo Cham Katubim Al Sefer Dabrai Chayamim La Meleki Mideh Ufaras Ki Mordecai Chayuhadim Mishenai La Melech Ahasuerus Vagadol Chayuhadim Varasul Achro Achel Darash Tob Laramo Wodaber Shalom Lako Zerau. And Ahasuerus laid a tax on the land and on the isles of the sea, and all the acts of his authority and of his might, and the declaration of the greatness of Mordecai, with which the king made him great. Are they not written in the book of the matters of the days of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai, the Jew, was next to King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and pleasing to the multitude of his brothers, seeking the welfare of his people, and speaking peace to all his seed. Selah. So concludes the reading of the book of Esther in Hebrew and in English. Yebraka Yahweh wa Yishmaraka, Ya'e Yahweh Panawalecha, Wechoneka, Yasa Yahweh Panawalecha, wa Yasim Leka Shalom. May Yahweh bless you and may he keep you, and may the face of Yahweh shine upon you and be gracious to you, and may the face of Yahweh rise upon you and give you shalom.